If you have a spare room in your house, you could rent that room out to a lodger for a fee for a year. Now, believe it or not, you could do similar things with stocks or shares. My name is Kieran King, and today we're going to be talking about stock lending agreements, how they are used, how they work, how people make and lose money from them. Let's dive in. Now, a stock lending agreement is exactly what it says. It is an agreement between two parties where one is a lender of the stock and one is a borrower of the stock. The party that borrowed the stock has to give the stock back at a certain point of time. However, before that time comes, the borrower can play with that stock and attempt to make money off of it. The typical method used is known as short selling, and we're going to get into it a bit later. Anyways, let's look at an example. Imagine three parties, Jack, Alice, and a broker that connects the two. Jack owns one share of Apple stock worth $300. That's the market price at the moment. Now, Alice over here believes that Apple is going to drop in value next month. And she goes to the broker and says, look, I want to borrow one share of Apple stock and I will return you your share in 1 month. On the other side of the broker, Jack says, sure, I'm willing to lend my share of Apple stock in return for a fee plus interest. Now, Alice, in order to borrow this stock, will need to put up some form of collateral or security in case she can't pay back the borrowed shares. Anyways, Jack agrees and they both sign a stock lending agreement with the broker. Alice becomes the owner of this one share of Apple stock, along with all the voting and ownership rights associated with it, for a period of time, that is. She then sells that stock on to a third party who buys it for the market price of $300. Over the next few weeks, however, Apple drops in value until one share is now only worth $250. Alice then buys back the share from the market for $250. And having bought this share back for a lower price, she has essentially made $50 of profit, minus any other fees associated with what she owes the lender. Now, this whole process here is known as short selling. She has effectively made a bet that the price of the share will go down and she's won. At the end of the borrowing period, Alice then gives the borrowed share back to the broker, who returns it to Jack. It all has worked out for Alice. But what happens if Alice's hunch is wrong and Apple goes up in value instead of dropping? Well, let's look at the example again. Alice sells the stock to a third party for $300. However, instead of going down, the price of Apple goes up to $350 per share. Now, at the end of the borrowing period, Alice will need to fulfill her obligation to pay Jack back his share, and will need to buy the share back from the market to do this. And if she can only buy the share back at $350, she has essentially made a loss of $50. This is because she sold the shares originally for $300 but bought them back for $350. So why would anyone lend stock to others? Well, it can be potentially quite rewarding. As I said at the start, it's like having a space in your room in your house that you rent out to a lodger. You're making your stocks work for you by renting them out to others, and the returns can be quite attractive. The yield could be as much as 5 to 10% a month. But what are the downsides to the lender? The people who borrow stocks tend to do one thing: short sell them. If someone is short selling a stock, that means that they believe the stock is going to drop in value. Suppose you have lots of short sellers. This exerts downward pressure on a stock that sometimes causes it to slump. As a lender, do you want to contribute to stocks you ultimately own dropping in value? Probably not. Secondly, there is a risk that the borrower will default and not be able to give back the shares that they have borrowed and sold on. If the stock rallies, which means it just goes up rapidly in a short period of time, during the time the loan is given, the borrower may not have enough funds to buy the stock back from the market to return it to the lender. In that case, the initial collateral may be given to the lender, but it still might not be enough to cover the losses, so there's a little bit of risk here too. But what are the downsides to the borrower? Anyone selling stock they have borrowed could potentially face unlimited losses. In our same example, imagine Apple stock goes up to $2,000 or $3,000 in a short space of time. No matter how high the stock goes, Alice is still obligated to buy back those shares at that price, which could have disastrous consequences if she doesn't have the money to do so. Now, I must point out that the example we used here is somewhat theoretical. The reality is that the roles are not as simply defined as lender, broker, and borrower. The borrower may not be borrowing shares from the lender. Instead, the borrower may be indirectly borrowing shares from another borrower who has borrowed shares from somewhere else. Not only that, a borrower could be borrowing shares on someone's margin account, meaning shares that are not exactly owned outright in the first place. As you can see, it can get pretty confusing. However, the good thing is, usually you don't have to worry about who is on the other side of the transaction, as all your activities will be with one party, which is your broker. And there you have it. I hope you enjoyed this one. If you did, please smash that like and subscribe button and stay tuned for more. Feel free to comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Take care everyone. See you soon.